Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Wendy. And what Wendy's essentially about is it's basically a modern day retelling of the classic Peter Pan story, only it is of course in the character of Wendy's perspective and her brothers getting whisked away to Neverland and basically learning what it means to never grow up and sort of like the implications behind it, but also them learning how important adults are and all that kind of stuff. So, Wendy, overall, I was really excited for this film. I mean, especially knowing who was behind it. Ben Zeitlin is a director that I am a big fan of. I loved his previous film, Beasts of Southern Wild. I think that film is just so whimsical and creative and really raw in its depiction of, very rough childhood and things like that. And I did rewatch it before this, and oh my god, it still holds up immensely. And ever since then, I've been waiting for him to come out with another film. I thought that was such a great directorial debut. I was really hoping for him to put out something great here, and Wendy seemed like it was going to be another really great follow-up. It looked like it was going to retain the childlike innocence, but also tell a much more epic story in terms of scope, and I was really pulling for this film. It had a lot of potential behind it, and I gotta say, this is maybe the most disappointing film I have seen so far this year. Wendy is a film that has a lot of great ideas behind it, but it's a film that is really lacking a lot of what I really came to expect from it, unfortunately. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And starting off with the acting, this is where we get to one of the things that is very much a mixed bag for me. There are some performances here that are really good, and some that just really fall flat entirely. I think Zeitlin's biggest issue with this movie is that he does a lot of similar things that he did with Beasts of Southern Wild, which is an issue I'm going to get into a little bit later, but one of the things he did with that film is that he cast relatively unknown actors, and he did the same thing here. But the problem is most of these actors just aren't really all that good. I will say the main girl, Devin, who played Wendy, I actually do see some potential, and she definitely did carry this film pretty well. You could tell that she was into it. You definitely felt the leadership in her character, and she really was able to, I think, give layers to something that wasn't really there, and I was overall impressed with what she did in the film. But really, everyone else, acting-wise, just didn't really do all that much for me. Actors like Yashua Mack as Peter, I just did not buy at all. It was just very unconvincing. Both Gage Naquin and Gavin Naquin as Douglas and James, I didn't really buy either. Just a lot of these actors, I wouldn't say they're bad necessarily, but they feel like kids. That's the best way to sum it up. Like, you can tell these are kids. They're not actors, and it feels that way, and that's always unfortunate for sure. And considering that Quavonzane Wallace and Dwight Henry carried Beasts of Southern Wild so well, this is definitely very disappointing for sure. I did not think this cast was all that great, minus, like I said, Devin overall. But now we get to the thing that unfortunately really brings this film down, which is the directing and the writing, which this is where we get to my biggest complaint with the film. Ben Zeitlin, like I said, I think his biggest issue with this movie are two things. One, he knew that the Peter Pan adaptation has been done to death, so he didn't feel he needed to try as hard, but he also knew how successful his previous film was, and it feels like because of all the things he did right in that film, he felt like he just had to simply do that here again, and it just doesn't work this time around. I think this film's biggest issue is that it can't really decide what it wants to be. Is it trying to be a fun, whimsical adventure, or is it trying to be something a lot darker and a lot more twisted in that way? It really had a hard time trying to figure out what tone he was really trying to go for here. Is he trying to go for something fun, or is he trying to go for something a lot darker? And it just didn't really work in terms of directing, and it didn't really feel like he had a good idea of what he wanted this movie to be like. He had an idea of doing a Peter Pan film with Wendy as the main character, but that's really all it seemed like he had an idea of in terms of directing. And it especially is apparent when it comes to his screenplay, though, which I'm sorry to say is kind of an utter mess. There is just so much going on in this story that just doesn't really work at all, starting off with the fact that he does not seem to know what to do with this story. I think the biggest problem here is that in terms of the overall story, it's very much lacking. Yes, there's a lot of similarities towards this and the original Peter Pan story, but what it's trying to do, I just don't really think works overall. And I think that's really its biggest issue, is that it feels it doesn't need to try as hard. And so the biggest issue are really all of the character motivations in this movie, which you just don't really end up feeling really any of them, especially when it comes to the character of Wendy. You know, you don't really get the sense beyond a surface level why she wants to enter Neverland, why she really wants to go on this adventure. We see in the beginning she's a young child. She sees a scene of a young kid going on about how he doesn't want to be a janitor, and he whisks himself away on this train to Neverland. And aside from that, we have no reason why she wants to go there. So it's very hard to connect to this character, and considering that she is the main character, I honestly didn't give a shit about her. I liked the actress, like I said, it was definitely, she made it watchable, but I did not care about Wendy as a character because I just did not know enough about this Wendy. And I think that's the biggest problem with this movie, is that Zeitlin feels that, oh, people know the story, so I don't need to try as hard. And it very much does show, because the Wendy in this movie, I just had a very hard time trying to figure out what exactly he's trying to do. He also does not seem to understand the character really at all, because the whole idea, the whole novelty, I think, of doing a film about Wendy is you can really focus on the fact that she is this maternal figure to Peter and all the Lost Boys. But in this movie, she does not seem to give a shit about them. And it's like, what the hell? Like, this is the most important part of this character. This is the thing that you really could have built on, and they don't. And her connection with Peter as well, it just really doesn't work in that way. And the character of Peter also, I don't know what they're trying to do with him. He is honestly very unlikable here. He comes off as kind of an asshole, someone who is very much an attention whore. He loves to, you know, make sure that things are going his way. He's always calling the shots, and where they end up going with him was just very confusing for me. Sometimes he is the fun Peter Pan we know, and then other times he's like this villainous dictator of sorts, and I just didn't really know what they were trying to do with this character. One Direction especially, I just did not get where they were going with him, and I don't think it worked very much at all. And so on that front, they don't do a good job of really getting you to care about these characters. All of these characters, these weird shifts that happen, the problem is none of them feel earned. None of them really feel like this is something that was leading up to this, because we don't know really anything about these characters. Wendy's brothers, forget it. We don't know anything about them other than they don't really want to be here, and then all of a sudden they're just into it. They're fine with going to Neverland, even though a few minutes ago they were trying to get her off the train. They're fine with going there for no reason. They want to escape, and again, there's no reason provided, and there's no character to them other than they're Wendy's brothers, and they're in this situation, and, you know, they get into peril and things like that. That's really it. There's not much going on in terms of substance here, and it's very disappointing, because that's something that Zeitlin did so well with his previous film. He really took the time in getting you to feel the situation that Hush Puppy and her dad were in Beast of Southern Wild, you know, and the bathtub community. He doesn't really do that here with Neverland. He just kind of like throws you in here, and it is very, very disappointing to say the least. And again, the problem is not that he takes things from his previous film that worked and, you know, do something similar here. The problem is he clearly does not seem to understand what actually worked in that movie. What worked in that movie was not just amazing visuals and great narration and a really great score. What worked is the time that he really did take in fleshing out this world, in the depth he gave to the characters, in the, you know, the way that he directed directed it, the rawness of it all, none of that is here. It feels like all of that has really been stripped away to a fairly surface level story that is just lacking so much. And again, considering the amount of stuff that happens in this movie, that's just not acceptable. It's very upsetting that he decided to do this, because I feel like he just didn't understand his own movie, which is really weird to me, because, you know, he directed it, but it feels like 8 years later, he has completely miscalculated what actually worked in that movie and what he could have done similar here. And I just feel it really brings this film down a lot overall. It also feels like the film itself at points feels borderline incoherent. Like, it doesn't really know what it wants to do in terms of story. It very much feels like it's spinning its wheels. There's a point, especially in the second act, where I felt like, wow, it could just end here. Like, it kind of feels like we're already done. And then the film just keeps going after that. And, it just didn't really work overall. I didn't really feel like the story was all that well fleshed out. I will say the message here is still really good. The film is clearly trying to say a lot about how important adulthood is, but also how much we should rely on adults and how much they provide for us and things like that, and how important that is. And that message is really great for sure. But it doesn't feel earned in the slightest, much like a lot of things in this movie. But the other thing is that I think that Zeitlin really did a poor job with here is that he seems to take a lot of similar things that worked in Beasts of Southern Wild and apply them here, and they just don't work. For example, similar to Beasts of Southern Wild, Wendy narrates this entire movie, and at no point does it feel necessary. Every single time, I'm just like, just shut up. Like, I don't understand why you need to tell me this. Like, it's pretty obvious how this character is feeling. It's kind of similar to how I felt about Gretel and Hansel, where this narration felt like, if anything, it was hindering the movie. It didn't feel like it was helping me understand these characters. It just felt like it was hindering what could have been actually a very effective film. But you have Wendy narrate the entire thing for virtually no reason, and honestly just made things kind of confusing at points. Like, anytime she speaks in the movie, it feels like it's either the beginning or the end of the movie. It was really weird the way they went about it, and I just don't think that the narration worked very well here. And then the sort of environment that Wendy's in, it's similar to the bathtub community, and it just felt very lazy in that way. It felt like Zeitlin didn't really want to challenge himself, and this is what I always say with directors, is that when you're making a second film, yes, you can have similar aspects to your previous film, but it should be something really different. Look at, like, Ari Aster with Hereditary and Midsommar, two drastically different films. Look at Jordan Peele with Us and Get Out, very different films. That's not really the case with Ben Zeitlin here. He essentially is doing the same thing, just it's Peter Pan now, and it just doesn't really work in that way, I have to say. The film also has a tendency to get very overly dark at points, and when I mean dark, I mean it goes to some really, really crazy and twisted places that I wasn't really expecting, and in no point does it feel earned. And I'm not saying that this film couldn't have been darker, because it absolutely could have, but it always feels like it's just doing that because, oh, it's time to be serious now, it's time to get you invested in the story, and it's like, you didn't set that up to begin with, so why do you think I would care? There's one direction especially that they take in the third act that I just did not make sense to me at all, and especially the way the movie ends, I'm just like, wait, so you just established this, so then how does this make sense? I don't know, it just did not work at all. The screenplay is an utter mess, and I just do not think he did a very good job with it. It's easily the weakest thing about this movie, unfortunately, but I will say, in terms of visuals, this film absolutely kills it in that department. That's definitely something that did not change at all. They're absolutely stunning. You really do feel like you're in Neverland. There's always something to look at, and that's the thing. I feel like you can't get bored with this movie because the visuals are just so grand and spectacular in that way, and that's something that will really suck you into this world. And it just sucks that the story is so emotionally hollow in that way, because the visuals do such a great job. at really creating this world. You really do feel like if Neverland was a real place, this is what it would look like in modern day, and I thought they did a really good job with that. And then the score by Dan Romer, holy shit, I cannot praise it enough. I mean, I heard in the trailer, and it took my breath away. It's nothing like seeing it in the film. Seeing it in the film is a whole different experience entirely. It's so just epic and whimsical and perfectly sucks you into the environment of the film, and I just really love the score here. It's one of those things where it's able to heighten a scene that I wasn't really feeling that much with and really give it more of a meaning, and I thought that the score was definitely probably one of the best of the year. Even I think at the end of this year, it's definitely one of those scores I can see myself listening to on my own, even if I don't like the movie. I can definitely see myself still listening to the score because it's just one that is going to stick with you for a while, and I really do love the score of this movie. The editing, though, I have to say, is a hot mess when it comes to this film. That's the other thing that really brings it down, is the editing here. It's just not very well paced, and the film just feels way too rushed, especially in the beginning. It takes them about maybe 10 minutes to actually get to Neverland, and that was just not enough time. They needed more time to establish why they care about this. Why did they want to go to Neverland? Why does this matter to Wendy? What is the environment that they're in? We don't really know that much. We know that they have a mom. We know that they go to this prep school that Wendy clearly doesn't like all that much, but other than that, there's not really enough of a reason for us to care, and I just didn't feel the pacing was that good. It was just so rushed throughout, whether it was the beginning or the way the end really rushes things there. The ending feels so compressed in that way. It feels like there's so much more they could have dived into. And then the way the movie ends as well, like I said, it is the same ending as the original Peter Pan story, and that is a timeless ending. But the problem is, considering what they're trying to do in this movie, I don't really know if it's the right ending for this film. It feels like they ended it that way because that's how the Peter Pan book ends, and they don't want to piss off the book readers. But I feel like considering what this movie was going for, they probably could have ended it differently, and I would have been completely fine with that, but they didn't. They took the easy way out, just like a lot of this film, and that's really what does bring it down. So overall, Wendy is just a really disappointing film, I gotta say. This is a film that had a lot of potential behind it. I really do love the concept, but it's a film that just simply did not understand its potential. It's helmed by someone who I do think is legitimately talented, but he just did not want to challenge himself. It's a very inherently lazy and, again, almost messily edited film that just doesn't feel like it has any idea of what it really wants to do. It has child actors that mostly feel like child actors, minus, like I said, Devin, who I do think actually does have some talent. It's got a beautiful score, some very astounding visuals, but other than that, there just isn't really that much it does overall deliver on. And just in the end, walking out of it, I just found myself feeling very emotionally hollow and fairly disconnected to what was going on, which is mainly just due to a lack of care when it comes to its characters and its setting overall, which are things that are important, but Zeitlin just felt he didn't need to try as hard, clearly, because, well, it's an adaptation, and that is, I think, really the big thing that really does bring this down. I do hope Zeitlin does put out some more work. I want to see him make up something better than this, but if this is what he's going to churn out moving forward, I am definitely not for it, because this is not at all what I would expect from him, and considering we waited 8 years, I would expect a lot more from this director for sure. I can't even say he didn't have enough time. It really just felt like he wanted to take the easy way out. He didn't really want to challenge himself, and it definitely does show here for sure. Wendy was highly disappointing, and I'm definitely going to give it overall a C. But over, guys, in my review of Wendy, let me know what you guys saw of this movie overall. If your thoughts on it, we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.